Well, let's leave the tawdry world of tabloid and filth for just a second and go check out the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's actually doing important things that'll last for the rest of our lives. Welcome to Doug in Exile. This is where the happy patriots are. Shout out to the Quad Club, to the people who watch all 4 videos all the way through. You're the ones keeping the lights on around here. And of course, subscribe. That's how you say thank you. Let's watch. First, this is the article that, the Supreme Court still in session, but these are warnings of what's coming next. This is the biggest Supreme Court case, probably, the Roe v. Wade one actually saved lives. But this one saves the most robust form of free speech, going back to how America got started because we wanted to have religious freedom. So this deals with that. Concerns, well, first up here, let's go here. The Supreme Court may soon consider overturning a 45-year precedent. This has to do with religious freedom and freedom of speech, which they've always misinterpreted, I believe, in a way that the founders did not intend. So let's watch. Okay, we've got concerns emanating from 3 states' legislative decisions to display the 10 Commandments in public schools has raised questions of whether the U.S. Supreme Court may ultimately weigh its hand on the issue at the national level. And I believe this is important. If the Constitution spoke to our rights to display, and if the courts and the Congress cannot change that right? They cannot pass laws against it, then it will have to do with other forms of religious free speech also.
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered major victories for religious freedom, specifically in 2 separate cases, both of them involving plaintiffs of the Christian faith. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of expanding the level of protections that religious believers enjoy.
First Amendment rights and issues of separation of church and state have become front and center after legislatures in the states of Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas passed laws requiring public schools to display the 10 Commandments. Several plaintiffs across this trio of states have brought lawsuits forward challenging laws that pass. In June, 7 Arkansas families filed suits against the state law signed by Republican Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders and intended to go into effect in the public school classrooms and libraries, arguing that constitutional rights were violated. Days later, a panel of 3 federal appellate judges ruled that Louisiana's similar law pertaining to the 10 Commandments was unconstitutional. The 5th U.S. Circuit of Appeals called the law plainly unconstitutional. Louisiana Attorney General Liz Murrill disagreed with the ruling, saying that she would appeal the decision and possibly take it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, according to the Associated Press. So this is where the atheists and those people pushed against it. They're appealing it up to the Supreme Court. And then days after that appellate decision in Louisiana, a group of Dallas, Texas-based families and faith leaders filed federal litigation seeking to block the law in their home state, arguing in part that the public school display of the 10 Commandments, quote, will be forcibly subjected to scriptural dictates day in and day out, and that its enforcement violates the fundamental religious freedom principles that animated the founding of our nation. If they're animating them outside of the Bible, they're wrong. That's not what the founders believe. So you have to go back to the founders' intent, would be what Scalia would say. Now, as of February 2025, Republicans in at least 15 states introduced similar legislation requiring the 10 Commandments to be displayed in public schools, according to the state line.
That's because not only did the court clarify that businesses throughout the country must accommodate religious practices, but also in a landmark decision, the court ruled that government cannot force Americans to abandon either their constitutional rights and or their religious convictions in order for those Americans to be able to operate a business. And as such, they cannot be forced to make, for instance, a gay marriage website if they don't agree with it.
And by the way, this is just acknowledging, even if it's just for historical reasons, forget if it doesn't have to be an expression of religion, although I do believe this expression of religion is okay. You could say purely on historical grounds, our entire rule of law comes from like going back to Blackmun and all this natural rights theory and Magna Carta and all these rules of laws that point back to the Ten Commandments and the Bible's rule of law. That is, that laws ultimately come from God. They are not made up in and of themselves. Several critics of Republicans' legislative moves to bring religion into public educational spaces expressed wide-ranging concerns to Newsweek, just to Newsweek, including laws separating church and state and efforts on behalf of conservatives to install a broader Christian nationalist. Now, here comes the bad word, Christian nationalist. That's the big boogeyman word. Are you a Christian nationalist? I am, but I'm only saying I know what they mean by using the boogeyman term, Christian nationalist. It's a word that you would not have heard them bring up, say, 5 years ago. A Christian nationalist framework that caused widespread concern emanating from Project 2025. There you go. It's the boogeyman. Project 2025 is back. That great work of fiction. Quote, these 10 Commandments display laws are part of a broader Christian nationalist movement to impose one narrow set of religious beliefs on our nation's public school children. Rachel Lacer, president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, told Newsweek. There they go, automatic losers. These people weren't there when my daughter went to first grade in a public school in Glendale and they were celebrating Kwanzaa. None of that then. Quote, our country's foundational promise of church-state separation, that was not a foundational promise enumerated in the Constitution at all. And religious freedom, religion having freedom from government, means that families, not politicians, get to decide how and when children engage with religion. And by the way, they are saying how and when children engage with religion if they demand that the 10 commandments be removed from public schools. They're demanding a kid not participate in being able to read it at school. So that whole trick, it's all a trick, a word trick, where they claim that they're neutral, that being atheistic is neutral, removing it all, censoring it all is neutral. It's not neutral. You might be staking atheistic religious grounds, but you're not being neutral. America and United allied with other groups to sue the three aforementioned states, relying on the 1980 case ruled by the Supreme Court, Stone versus Graham, in which they ruled in an unsigned decision that a Kentucky statute requiring a copy of the 10 Commandments be hung in every public school classroom violated the Establishment Clause. By the way, the establishment was to keep from establishing one denomination, a state denomination, which doing the 10 Commandments does not prefer any one denomination over another. They could be Jewish, they could be Catholic, they could be Protestant, they could be Pentecostal. The Christian nationalists behind the laws believe they have allies among the ultra-conservative members of the Supreme Court, unquote, Lasser said. But the Supreme Court has always recognized that public school children are a captive, impressionable audience that must be protected from religious coercion. What about teaching them about global climate change? Isn't that, or evolution? Isn't that religious coercion? Quote, America's highest court would be thumbing its nose at our founders' intentional promise of religious freedom, not to mention long-standing legal precedent if it allowed these displays to go forward. By the way, our Supreme Court has images of Muhammad, images of Moses in the 10 Commandments, carved in stone all around the court. Mikey Weinstein, founder, the president of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, MRFF, told Newsweek that the large civil rights organization focuses on one thing and one thing only, and that is a separation of church and state. And by the way, so nowhere is it enumerated that there must be a separation of church and state. There is that the Congress shall make no law limiting religious freedom. MRFF has just under 100,000 clients across all branches of the military and the Department of Defense and all U.S. national security agencies, with roughly 95% of them being Christian. These are all liberal Christians. He questioned which version of the 10 Commandments lawmakers and other officials in authority even want to display in public buildings. I say all of them. I say if there's 16 different versions, I say we have 16 different versions all displayed by force. There, I just ended your argument. I'll go home. The point is that the 6-3 majority of the Supreme Court will decide what they want. Then they try to rationalize it. By the way, that's what Weinstein said. And by the way, that's what the Supreme Court does about every single law, including that you can't own slaves, that women can vote. It's a majority on the Supreme Court will decide what they want, and then they rationalize it, try to rationalize it. That's what they do on everything. Some things you agree with and some things you don't. So it's useless to look at any of the prior cases. I fully expect the Supreme Court will allow this in Arkansas, Louisiana, wherever the hell it's going to be. Red states, he said. I'm old enough to remember when I was born and raised in Albuquerque, being forced to be in a Christmas play as a little Jewish kid in the school. Dude, the Jew's best friend of that whole, including merely ethnic Jews, their best friend are evangelical Christians, and they all know it. So that this guy is going after Christians is not very Jewish from him. We're going to go to here because this is a most interesting paragraph. Freedom for and from religion. Patrick Elliott, legal director, and Freedom from Religion Foundation told Newsweek that he's concerned about broader laws nationally, considering the number of states that have attempted unsuccessfully thus far to mirror Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. He also acknowledged that such a movement could occur a long time from now, as the court currently has no such case in front of it. So this is not going to the Supreme Court. We would oppose at the Freedom of Religion Foundation any religion being given favoritism and being posted on the walls of the public buildings. Okay, well, that would favor the religion of atheism that wants them all removed. And yes, it is a formal religion. Some chapters, by the way, even getting 501c3 status. Okay, so this is, so far, it is being prepped to go to the Supreme Court. It is not going up there anytime soon. This is kind of a chicken sky is falling thing. Fear, because the right-wing Supreme Court has had its way, that they're going to greatly come in and go after free speech, which they're not. I don't think this court would ever take this one up even. I'm Doug in Exile.